Once upon a time, in a quiet little town nestled between rolling hills and golden fields, there lived an old woman named Margaret. She was a gentle soul with silver hair that shimmered in the morning light, and deep, wise eyes that had seen both the joys and sorrows of life. Her home was a cozy wooden cottage with a white picket fence, a well-tended garden, and a rocking chair that creaked on the front porch as she watched the world go. Margaret was loved by everyone in town. Young and old alike sought her wisdom, for she carried an air of peace that was rare in a world full of worries. No matter what happened, whether a storm tore through the fields, whether times were hard, or whether loss came knocking at her door, Margaret always had a warm smile and a kind word. One crisp autumn afternoon, a young man named James, who had lived in the town his whole life, came to visit her. His heart was heavy with questions he didn't quite know how to put into words. He found Margaret on her porch, sipping tea from a delicate porcelain cup, the scent of cinnamon and apples lingering in the cool air. "Miss Margaret," James said hesitantly, taking a seat beside her, "I've always wondered, how is it that you are always happy? No matter what happens, you never seem sad. Don't you ever feel down when things go wrong?" Margaret chuckled, the sound soft and full of understanding. She set her tea down and folded her hands in her lap. "Oh, my dear," she said, her voice rich with warmth, "of course I feel sadness. Of course I've had my fair share of heartache. Life isn't always easy. But I've learned something over the years. Happiness isn't something the world gives you. It's something you choose." James frowned. "But how can you just choose to be happy when bad things happen?" Margaret sighed, her eyes drifting toward the golden leaves swirling in the breeze. "Let me tell you a story," she said. "A story from my own life." She took a deep breath before beginning. "When I was young, I had everything I ever needed. A loving husband, 2 beautiful children, and a little house that was full of laughter. We weren't rich, but we had each other. And that was enough. Life was simple, and I was happy. But happiness can feel fragile when you don't understand where it comes from." James watched as her expression softened, memories flickering in her eyes. "One winter, my husband, John, fell ill. It started as a simple cough, nothing to worry about, or so we thought. But it worsened. We didn't have the money for doctors or fancy treatments. I did everything I could. Home remedies, prayers, sleepless nights by his bedside. But no matter how hard I fought, I couldn't save him. He passed away one bitter January morning, and my world shattered." Margaret paused, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. "I cried until I thought my heart would never mend. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I felt like life had stolen everything from me. My children still needed me, but I was lost in my own sorrow. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and I felt like I was drowning." James leaned in, feeling the weight of her words. "How did you get through it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Margaret smiled faintly. "One morning, I woke up and realized something. My sadness wasn't bringing John back. My children needed their mother, and if I let grief consume me, I would lose more than just my husband. I would lose myself. So I made a decision. A small one, but a powerful one." James waited, his breath caught in his throat. Margaret turned to him, her eyes twinkling. "Every morning, before I got out of bed, I told myself, today is a new day, and I will find something, just one thing, to be grateful for. Some days, it was easy. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, My children's laughter filled the house. Other days, it was hard. But even then, I found something. Maybe it was just the warmth of my coffee in my hands, the smell of fresh baked bread from the bakery down the street, or the kindness of a neighbor who checked in on me. But there was always something. James exhaled, his shoulders relaxing. "But what if something really terrible happens?" he asked. "Something so awful that it's impossible to find any good in it?" Margaret nodded knowingly. "Bad times will come. There's no avoiding that. But here's what I remind myself. Everything passes. Even the worst storms don't last forever. When trouble comes, I tell myself, this too shall pass. I focus on the good things I still have. My health, my friends, the simple fact that I am still here, still alive, still breathing." She reached for his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "Happiness isn't about avoiding pain, my dear. It's about learning to hold joy and sorrow in the same hands. It's about choosing to see the light, even when the darkness threatens to take over." James sat in silence for a moment, absorbing her words. He looked around, the golden leaves rustling in the trees, the scent of freshly baked pie drifting from a neighbor's house, the sound of children laughing in the distance. He had never really noticed these things before. "Thank you, Miss Margaret," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "I think I understand now." She patted his hand and smiled. "It takes practice, but once you start looking for the good, you'll find that it was always there, waiting for you to notice it." From that day on, James made a promise to himself. Every morning, just like Margaret, he would find something, one small thing, to be grateful for. At first it was difficult. His mind was used to focusing on the problems, the worries, the things that went wrong. But slowly, something shifted. He started to see the beauty in everyday life, the golden glow of the sunrise, the warmth of a hug from an old friend, the simple pleasure of a warm meal on a cold night. Even when hardships came, he reminded himself, this too shall pass. Word of Margaret's wisdom spread throughout the town. More and more people began to embrace her philosophy. They learned that happiness wasn't about what they had or what happened to them. It was about how they saw the world. The little town, once weighed down by its worries, began to hum with a newfound joy. And so, thanks to the wisdom of one old woman who had learned to choose happiness even in the face of loss, the town became a brighter, warmer, and more peaceful place. Because in the end, Margaret was right. Happiness is a choice, a quiet decision we make every day, no matter what life brings our way. And for those willing to look for it, joy can always be found, even in the smallest of things.